Okay. Hotel. Welcome in, everybody. Let me check a few things, make sure we good to go before we get started. In the meantime, in between time, welcome back to Matthew Daniels TV. I'm your host, Matthew Daniels, the writer, the author, the scribe, and the bookworm. But I'm not just a bookworm world. I am the real bookworm. Make sure you get it right. I'm doing the book game like it ain't never been done before. And I'm doing the book game like it'll probably never be done again, family. Give me just a second to make sure I got everything set up correctly. And we're going to get right off into the show. All right. Thank you all for tapping in. Hit that like button. There we go. Hit that like button on your way in, family. Hit that like button. And if you haven't already subscribed, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Okay. If you haven't already subscribed, make sure that you subscribe to the channel. I greatly appreciate it. All right. I greatly appreciate it. Let me see here. Let's do it like this. And we're going to get started. Okay, y'all see the title of this one. Today, we're going to be talking about one of the first Negro teachers in Portsmouth, Virginia. And this is around circa 1874. One of the first Negro teachers in Portsmouth, Virginia. Now, why am I doing this real quick? I like to highlight a lot of African-American history, and I like to give accurate African-American history as told by our ancestors themselves, because I feel like a lot of times when we look into history and we study history and we try to get an understanding of history, a lot of times we tend to go thousands of years into the ancient past. We'll look up ancient Nubia. We'll look up ancient Sudan. We'll look up ancient Ethiopia. We'll look up ancient Egypt. Even behind me, I have the Egyptian Neteru or the Egyptian god Anubis or Ampu. I love ancient history. We'll read about the Greeks. We'll read about the Romans. We'll read about the ancient empire of Mali. Right? We'll read about the ancient kingdom of Congo. And a lot of times, as African Americans, when we look into Black history, a lot of times we tend to overlook the period of the transatlantic slave trade and the years following the transatlantic slave trade. And when we look into our history, we go into the distant past. Now, there's nothing wrong with going into the distant past, because it is in the distant past that we will find our roots. But I personally feel that a lot more attention needs to be highlighted on our immediate history. And by our immediate history, I'm talking about the last 400 to 500 years. I'm talking about from the 1500s until now. So what I like to do with this channel, I like to highlight a lot of information about what went on during the times of slavery. And I like to highlight a lot of what went on immediately after slavery, during the Reconstruction era and during the Jim Crow era, because a lot of our ancestors' stories are amazing and magnificent. And a lot of our ancestors' stories get overlooked. And while we may find joy and significance in researching ancient history that comes from the continent of Africa, we can find just as much cultural significance when we study our more recent ancestors. Now, when we think about the time period right after slavery and during slavery, we have the famous figures with names that we all know. We all know the Booker T. Washingtons. We all know the Frederick Douglass. We all know the W.E.B. Du Bois. We all know the Harriet Tubman. We all know the Nat Turner. There are several key figures in our history on these shores, and there are several key events in our history on these shores that we all know so much about. But there are a lot more unsung heroes. And so today I'm going to introduce you guys to one of the first Negro teachers in Portsmouth, Virginia, around 1874, the period of Reconstruction in America. And this individual, this ancestor, was actually a woman. So I want to highlight some of her history and bring her story to life and allow her to speak so that we can honor our ancestor. Now, the ancestor that I'm going to be teaching you guys about today is ancestor Mary Jane Wilson, of the Virginia slave narratives. Now, if you don't mind, give me just a second. I'm seeing what it looks like on the screen, and I want this to I want to present my screen in a different way. If just a second, let me try like this. Let me try entire screen, and then let me pull this up, because I want this to be as large as possible so you guys can see it better. Okay, perfect. That's how I want it. Okay, so today I'm going to be teaching you guys about the ancestor Mary Jane Wilson, and I'm going to be coming out of the Virginia slave narratives. And this ancestor lived in Portsmouth, Virginia, as the title suggests. And as I always tell you guys, if you want to do further research on what your ancestors had to say themselves, the slave narratives is a great place to begin. So what we're going to do, we're going to look into this particular slave narrative, this Virginia slave narrative of the ancestor Mary Jane Wilson, and we're going to read her story, and I'm going to put it in historical context and teach you guys some of our African American Negro history that you may not know about. So without any further ado, let's get right off into the narrative and let's discuss history. Okay. So we see at the very top of the page, it says Negro pioneer teacher of Portsmouth, Virginia. One of the rooms in the old folks' home for colored in Portsmouth, Virginia, is occupied by an ex-slave, one of the first Negro teachers of Portsmouth. Now, what you're going to realize is that in the time period of the early 1900s, after slavery had ended with the ending of the Civil War in 1865, as our ancestors got older, there were certain old folks' home for colored individuals, the Negro population, what we now call the African American population. There were these old folks' homes all over the country. And so a lot of our ancestors, if they did not have children that could take care of them, they were placed inside of these old folks' homes, or these what we would probably call today retirement homes or retirement communities. And a lot of these slave narratives are gathered from individuals that they found residing inside of these old folks' homes. So you'll come across that a lot. It goes on to say, on meeting Miss Mary Jane Wilson, very little questioning was needed to get her to tell of her life. Drawing her chair near a small stove, she said, "My mother and father were slaves, and when I was born, that made me a slave. I was the only child. My mother was owned by one family, and my father was owned by another family. My mother and father was allowed to live together. One day, my father's master took my father to Norfolk and put him in a jail to stay until he could sell him. My missus bought my father so he could be with us." Now, there was a lot of information there of historical significance that I would like to point out. First thing that I would like to point out is that it was truly an amazing thing that when ancestor Mary Jane Wilson's father was about to be sold off to possibly another part of the country altogether, sold off into another state, the individual that owned her mother decided to purchase her father so that her family could stay together. Now, that was rare. The majority of the time during our ancestors' enslavement on these shores, the families were broken up. The fathers were often sold off to new plantations. The mothers were often sold off to new plantations. And even the children were snatched from mothers and fathers and sold off to new plantations. So it is rare that you will see a situation like this, where the father is about to be sold off to another plantation, and the owner of this lady's the owner of her mother would seek to keep her family together, so they went and bought her father. Now, although this individual owned slaves and they were a slave holding family, it says a lot about their character outside of that they would at least attempt to keep the family together. Now, if you see, I highlighted where it says, took my father's master, took my father to Norfolk and put him in jail to stay until he could sell him. Now, why I highlighted that is because I always try to tell you guys that within these slave narratives or within these oral histories of our ancestors, you can find information that was not known until recently. And a lot of them information that's known recently about our ancestors' enslavement and the years immediately following our ancestors' enslavement comes from these slave narratives. So I don't want you to look at these slave narratives and these oral histories as if they're not of historical value and significance. They actually are, because how this ancestor says that her father was took to Norfolk and put in jail to stay until he could sell him, until very recently, that would have sounded like a lie. It wasn't common knowledge that there were jails in Norfolk that was used to house our ancestors in order for them to be sold, specifically jails. Now, yes, there were always auction blocks, there were always auction houses, there were always places where our ancestors could be sold. But how Miss Ancestor Mary Jane Wilson specifically says a jail in Norfolk is of tremendous historical significance. Let me make it make sense. Real quick, Hotel Brooklyn Zoo, thank you for tapping in, brother. Appreciate the support. Sandra Askew, Hotel, and you more than welcome. We will let our ancestors speak. I'm trying to make this channel one of the premier channels for authentic African-American history or Negro history, what our ancestors would call in the majority of these ancient documents, Negro history on these shores, from the perspective of our ancestors themselves. We need more information out on what our ancestors had to say, and I want to make this channel a premier source for this type of information. So let's get into these Norfolk jails, family. When you look this up online, you will come across a story like this. You see the title, it says Hidden History, Norfolk Region's Domestic Slave Trade Exposed. Now, this was posted in February of 2023. So in February of 2023, somewhere around a year ago, they were saying that this was hidden history. So this hidden history that they are about to describe, our ancestor just told us about in the slave narratives, the AKA oral history from 1937. Look, they say, romanticized in art and whitewashed in history, an atrocity within the atrocity of slavery has been exposed. While researching the Underground Railroad, Norfolk State University historian Cassandra Newby Alexander learned there was a slave jail in Norfolk. A lot of people who were orchestrators were based right here in Norfolk, said Newby Alexandra. She turned to Norfolk Public Library Special Collections librarian Troy Vallows, who uncovered that Norfolk actually had 3 privately operated slave jails on what is now green space near St. Paul's Boulevard, Main Street, and Waterside Drive. I apologize. They go on to say by 1800, Virginia had more slaves than it needed for a shrinking agricultural industry. 50 years later, Norfolk took the lead in a massive legalized human trafficking industry. So what they are talking about is, in recent history, historians and librarians and individuals who were looking into the history of Norfolk uncovered, as they say, that there were actually slave jails in Norfolk that was part of the underground slave trade. Now, why I'm calling it an underground slave trade when slavery was legal is because not only did they have enslaved people locked away inside of these jails to be sold off. They also had individuals that were not slaves. A lot of times, what our ancestors would endure, they would work hard to get their freedom, and they even had free communities of Black people, African Americans, Negroes. There were all kinds of free Negro settlements around the country. And what individuals would do, they would go and kidnap these free Negroes, put them in with the enslaved Negroes, and then they would sell them off. Now, at these privately operated slave jails in Norfolk, they had indeed individuals that was born slaves, right, and were according to the disgusting law, legally slaves, but they also had individuals who were free and were being illegally sold off into slavery, which is why the history of these slave jails was suppressed and tried to be covered up. But in all actuality, they did not have to dig, right? They did not have to dig deep to find out about these slave jails, because our ancestors who experienced it had already told us about it. We knew about this massive legalized human trafficking industry that took people to slave jails in Norfolk, because our ancestor had already told us about them. Okay, so she goes on to say in her narrative, during this time, I was small and I didn't have so much work to do. I just helped around the house. I was in the yard one day and I saw so many men come marching down the street. I ran and told my mother what I'd seen. She tried to tell me what it was all about, but I couldn't understand her. Not long after that, we was free. So she's referring to the Civil War. At one point during the Civil War, the state of Virginia had chose to leave the Union and join the Confederacy. And so it actually became one of the headquarters of the Confederacy, Virginia. Fun fact, the first president of the United States, George Washington, he actually had a slave plantation in Virginia. Not that he was years before, several like a century before the actual Civil War, but George Washington actually had a plantation in Virginia as well. When they talk about his family line actually comes from Virginia. And so what our ancestor is explaining to us, that she was alive and she was young when the Civil War kicked off, and her mother tried to explain to her what was happening, but her young mind couldn't understand. She goes on to say, taking a long breath, the old woman said, my father went to work in the Norfolk Navy Yard as a teamster. He began right away buying us a home. We was one of the first Negro landowners in Portsmouth after emancipation. My father built his own house. It's only 2 blocks from here, and it still stands with few improvements. Now, why I highlighted that is because I like to point out, again, the historically significant information that we can get from these slave narratives. So she mentions that her father went to work at the Norfolk Navy Yard as a teamster. Now, obviously, this was a good job for a Negro to have at the time, because he was paid well enough to where he could immediately start trying to buy a home. And her family became one of the first Negro landowners in Portsmouth, Virginia, after the end of the Civil War. And her father had a home built on the land. Now, the Norfolk Navy Yard, it actually exists to this very day. It's still in use by the U.S. Navy, okay? And it was also significant during the Civil War. One of the things that I want you guys to know about the Norfolk Navy Yard and its significance to our ancestors' enslavement on these shores, before the Civil War, they had literally hundreds of our ancestors who worked on this Navy Yard. So when you encounter people who talk about how our ancestors literally with their hands built this nation, now we did not build this nation alone. Of course, the slave labor was the primary force to the physical labor, but we can't just take all of the credit. We got to be as honest as possible. But a major contributing factor that cannot be denied is our ancestors' contribution to building this nation into what it is today. And that Norfolk Navy Yard, even before her father started working there, even before the Civil War, it employed the slave labor of our ancestors to build it up and to keep it running. Okay. And again, that Navy Yard is actually still in operation to this very day. Now, the picture that you're seeing on your screen, that is the ruins of the shipyard, the Norfolk Navy shipyard after the Civil War. Remember, I told you guys that at one point, Virginia decided to leave the Union and become a part of the Confederacy. So whenever the Virginia decided to become a part of the Confederacy, the governmental structure of Virginia, the individuals that was working at the Navy Yard at that time, fearing that the Navy Yard would fall into Confederate hands and they would now have weaponry, more weaponry to help fight the Union, they burned it. They set the shipyard on fire. And subsequently, like they feared, the Confederacy actually took over the Norfolk Navy shipyard, and they held it for they held it for a small amount of time during the Civil War, and they actually used it to convert certain Confederate ships into what they call ironclad vessels, where they fitted them out with iron plates to prevent them from being shot down, so to speak, sunk in the waters. And it was from this Norfolk Navy shipyard that some of the ships that were involved in the most significant sea battles of the Civil War took place. Now, in around, I believe it was around like 1862, the Confederates were about to lose control of the Norfolk Navy shipyard, and before they lost control, they decided to set it on fire again so it wouldn't fall back into Union hands. And so they set it on fire once again. So the picture that you're seeing is actually from 1864, right? Now, the Civil War ended around that time, 1864, 1865. Excuse me. And you can see from the picture that the shipyard was left in ruins. It was left in ruins from being burned by the Union armies before the Confederates took over. And it was burned again by the Confederates when the Union Army took over. And it was the scene of conflict during the battle. So after the Civil War, her father went to work as a teamster right there at the Norfolk Navy shipyard. And one could assume, one could logically deduce that her father was employed in not only rebuilding the Norfolk Navy shipyard, but also in building it back up and helping to operate it. And he was in a long line of our ancestors who actually worked there enslaved, but when he had the opportunity to work there, he was paid, and apparently he was paid well because he was able to use that job to become a land owner, right? So let's continue reading. Let's see what the ancestor has to say. So she says, with a broad smile, Miss Wilson added, I didn't get any teachings when I was a slave. When I was free, I went to school. The first school I went to was held in a church. Soon, they built a school building that was called Chestnut Street Academy, and I went there. After finishing Chestnut Street Academy, I went to Hampton Institute. In 1874, 6 years after Hampton Institute was started, I graduated. So now we're getting into how this ancestor was educated, where this ancestor was educated, and how this led her into a teaching position and to being one of the first Negro teachers in Portsmouth, Virginia. Now, there's a lot of history to unpack in these few simple sentences. Okay, a lot of history that I'm going to help you guys unpack. So you see that she tells us that the first school she went to was held in a church. right? And probably the Emmanuel African Methodist Church, most likely. Though that's one of the oldest Negro churches in our country, and it was definitely in Virginia. And they probably held some kind of schooling inside of that church where they tried to teach our people after slavery. But she goes on to say that after that, they built a school building that was called Chestnut Street Academy, and she went there. So what I want to do is I want to give you guys a little information on this Chestnut Street Academy. What is Chestnut Street Academy? Is it even real? And how is it relevant to our ancestors' history? Okay, so in order for you guys to well, first let me say this. A lot of times an individual may be researching our ancestors' history, and sometimes they may give you the name of a place, an institution, and in our modern day, the name of that place or the name of that institution has changed. So it will be difficult for you to find a connection if you don't really dig for it. So I'm going to just give you guys a spoiler alert. The Chestnut Street Academy is the I.C. Nordcomb High School, or the I.C. Nordcomb School, period. Named after a man named Israel Charles Nordcomb. Now, even this information, I'm gonna lay it out for you guys, but even this information was not known, or it is claimed to not be known, but it is clearly in the records of our ancestor that she went to a place called Chestnut Street Academy. And so in modern times, the recollection of the Chestnut Street Academy seems to have been lost, but it has been uncovered, and we have our ancestors to thank for that. And I'm going to show you guys why. But first, let me explain to you what the I.C. Nordcomb High School is. It basically says I.C. Nordcomb High School is a public high school in Portsmouth, Virginia. We're in the exact same place. First point, it is administered by Portsmouth City Public Schools. The school colors are maroon and gray, and the mascot is the Greyhounds. The school was named after Israel Charles Nordcomb, its first supervising principal. So they're saying that this school is named after its first supervising principal, someone named Israel Charles Nordcomb. Now, the naming of this, or the renaming of this, I don't know if it was an explicit attempt to hide our ancestors' contribution to their own upliftment after slavery. I don't know if it was to bury it and to hide it, but it's quite possible that it was, because, like I'm going to prove, this was not the I.C. Nordcomb High School, right? This was Chestnut Street Academy, and it had teachers, and it had administration, and it had students before this guy, Israel Charles Nordcomb, became the supervising principal. He was not the first supervising principal, and his name should not be the name that dawns this school. They should do further research to find out who it actually was. So I want you guys to look at something real quick. When talking about the school, you see they said that it was founded in 1913. Founded in 1913. Now, Wikipedia needs to update itself because this is the old information. They're saying that it was founded in 1913 so that they can connect it to Israel Charles Nordcomb and not connect it to our ancestors. But I want you guys to look at an article I found online. Now, the headline of this article reads, "New studies indicate Nordcomb's beginnings go back 145 years. Pause. They thought the Nordcomb, I.C. Nordcomb's beginnings went back to 1913. You just seen it on Wikipedia. But they're saying that new studies indicate that Nordcomb's beginnings go back 145 years. Why are they saying that it goes back 145 years? And what are these new studies? And could these new studies really be old studies of our ancestors' oral history? Check this out. From September 29th to October 1st of this year, thousands of graduates of the historic I.C. Norcom High School will be participating in events observing the school's anniversary. But instead of celebrating a 110-year-old legacy of the school, which served Portsmouth's Black community during Jim Crow segregation, it will be the 145th. Many pieces of the historic puzzle have been pieced together to get a clear picture of the school's history. Sleuthing for historic connections by members of the Norcom Alumni Association in collaboration with the Portsmouth African American Historical Association and the Virginia Public Schools and the Library of Virginia reveals that I.C. Norcom is much older than has been thought, and perhaps is the second oldest in the United States behind Dunbar High in Washington, D.C. On February 23rd, with members of the Norcom Alumni Association on hand, the Portsmouth School Board put it in writing. It approved and issued a proclamation acknowledging the beginning of the institution known as Israel Charles Norcom High School as being established in 1878 from its origins, the Chestnut Street Colored School. I.C. Norcom High School has long been considered a major pipeline to the Portsmouth community through a rich legacy of leaders and educators. After extensive research of proven historical facts and data going back to 1878 with the Virginia Public Schools and the Library of Virginia, it has been confirmed that the genesis of I.C. Norcom High is the 1878 Chestnut Street School that started, as the Chestnut Street School for the Colored, which educated elementary students, and this same school graduated students from high school, right? Now, real quick, this is the confirmation that I.C. Norcom is really the Chestnut Street School, okay? It's really the Chestnut Street School. And what did our ancestors say? Soon, they builded a school building that was called Chestnut Street Academy School. The Chestnut Street Academy, the Chestnut Street School. I'm going to further prove that this is exactly what the ancestors talking about. And so what happened was they wanted to, or when they renamed it after, and I don't know if the guy's Jewish, but his name is Israel, so possibly he was Jewish. When they renamed it after this guy, Israel Charles Norcom, they buried the original history. Now, it is highly likely and highly probable that our ancestors are the ones who founded this school. I mean, who else would found the school for the colored? Okay? Who else would do it? And the first principals, the first teachers, the first administrators were our ancestors. And our ancestors' contribution to the upliftment of themselves after slavery has been buried and has been covered up. But in recent times, the alumni of that school dug up some information and they say, wait a minute, it has now been confirmed that the genesis of I.C. Norcom High is the 1878 Chestnut School that started as the Chestnut Street School for the Colored. Okay, and now in just a second, I'm going to show you guys how you further correct history in real time by using the records of your ancestors. Again, this channel will be the epitome of our history on these shores as told by our ancestors themselves. We will be correcting everything and giving out the proper information. Because even though they admitted this, that it shouldn't be named I.C. Norcom, right? Now that they've uncovered this, they should change it back to the Chestnut Street School, or they should name it after the real first principal, who is no doubt a person of color, a Negro, an African American, right? But they don't want to do that. But even with this confession that our ancestors founded this school, and our ancestors founded several schools around this nation, even with this confession, they still lie. Now we're going to hypothesize why they're lying, but first let me prove the lie. Check this out. You see in the last paragraph on the slide on the right, it says the resetting of this historical fact confirms that IC Norcom is one of the oldest historically black high schools in the nation, second only to Dunbar High School in Washington, D.C., which was established in 1870. Spoiler alert, I think they're still lying. They're telling some truth, but still lying, because they don't want Dunbar High School in Washington, D.C. to be upended as the oldest historically black high school in the nation. It's quite possibly this school here in Virginia. Now, why do I say that? You see that high school was established in 1870. And so they said that the Chestnut Street School was started in 1878, 8 years later. But I'm going to show you that 1878 date is a lie. Now, before I show you that, I want to further prove that they're using our ancestors' oral histories. Look, according to Hawthorne and Leasit, the new president of the Alumni Association, Chestnut was the only school in 1878 and years afterward. It provided not only elementary, but high school training for blacks. The two cite, Leasit and Hawthorne, the two cite a narrative of a former female slave, Mary Jane Wilson, recorded in April 1937. According to the narrative document, she was living out the remainder of her years in the old folks' home for colored teachers at that time. So they're saying that in order to help come to this conclusion that the IC Norcom is really the Chestnut Street School, they cited the slave narrative of Mary Jane Wilson. Who is Mary Jane Wilson? That's the ancestor that we're talking about right now. Look, interview of Miss Mary Jane Wilson in Portsmouth, Virginia. One of the rooms in the old folks' home for colored in Portsmouth, Virginia is occupied by an ex-slave. Look at the date, April 26, 1937. They say the two cite a narrative of a former female slave, Mary Jane Wilson, recorded in April 1937. According to the narrative document, she was living out the remainder of her years in the old folks' home for colored teachers at that time. So what they're referring to is the document that I'm reading to you right now. Okay? So in order to upend the lie that it was founded during the time of IC Norcom, and he was the first principal to help upend that lie, they cited the slave narrative, the oral history. Again, I keep telling you guys that the historical relevancy and the historical value and importance of what our ancestors left to us is immeasurable. It's immeasurable. And I'm going to be one of the primary sources where you get this information out of these slave narratives. But I want to show you guys how they lie even when they tell the truth. They lie even when they tell the truth. They lie even when they tell the truth. This is why you have to read it for yourself. This is why I am the real bookworm. I'm not a bookworm. I'm the real bookworm. I understand you have to read it for yourself, because they would have you believe that based on what Mary Jane Wilson said in her slave narrative, her oral history, that the Chestnut Street School was founded in 1878, right? That's what they just said. But check this out. Look, the ancestor said, after finishing Chestnut Street Academy, I went to Hampton Institute. This is how you correct history in real time with our oral history. After finishing Chestnut Street Academy, I went to Hampton Institute. In 1874, 6 years after Hampton Institute was started, I graduated. So the ancestor graduated from Hampton Institute in 1864. I'm going to say it again. The ancestor graduated from Hampton Institute in 1874. She went to Hampton after finishing at Chestnut Street Academy. So if she went to Chestnut Street Academy, finished there, then went to Hampton Institute, and I'm going to show you guys later, but at Hampton Institute, it was basically like a 3-year program. After finishing at Hampton, she graduated Hampton in 1874. That means she was at Chestnut, right? Prior to at least 1874, because that's when she graduated Hampton. So how is it that the Chestnut Street School was founded in 1878 if in 1874, 4 years before that date, she had already finished Hampton and had already finished at the Chestnut Street Academy? Make it make sense. Look what I wrote on the side. Ancestor Mary Wilson graduated Hampton in 1874 after finishing at Chestnut Street Academy. So how was Chestnut Street Academy or school started in 1878? Right? Let me say it again because I don't want this to go over your head. First, she went to Chestnut, finished Chestnut. Then she went to Hampton, graduated Hampton in 1874. Boom. So in 1874, she's finished with Hampton and she's finished with Chestnut. 1874. Now, they would have us believe that the Chestnut Street School or the Chestnut Street Academy was founded in 1878. How was it founded in 1878 if the ancestor attended prior to 1874? You get it? And the Hampton Institute consisted of a 3-year program. So in all likelihood, she began Hampton in 1871, right? And so depending on how many years she was at Chestnut, let's assume 4, right? Let's just assume 4. That would take us all the way back from 1871. Let's go back 4 years, 1870, 1869, 1868, 1867. So she could have been in Chestnut as early as 1867. So how is it that the Chestnut School was started in 1878? Yeah, exactly, Sandra Askew, exactly. And since they confessed that they're citing the narrative of Mary Jane Wilson recorded in April 1937, we know that there's some intentional mishandling of the dates. It's intentional because we all are reading it. They read it like I'm reading it to you all. They read her narrative, and her narrative said she graduated Hampton in 1874, and before that, she finished Chestnut Street Academy. So how was Chestnut Street Academy started in 1878? Why would they lie? I'm assuming because of this. On the bottom, where it says, the resetting of this historical fact confirms that IC Norcom is one of the oldest historically black high schools in the nation, second only to Dunbar High School in Washington, D.C., which was established in 1870. So the high school, the Dunbar High School in Washington, was established in 1870. She finished Chestnut in 1871, for sure. Right? But for whatever reason, and maybe I will go into that in another video, but for whatever reason, they didn't want to take the title from Dunbar, so they lied. They lied. And like I say, I'm gonna do some research on this, and right now I'm just hypothesizing, but it's possible that the Chestnut Street Academy didn't have as much white help as they would like. And if it was purely Negroes building a school and starting a school, maybe they don't want to say that the first, right, the oldest in the nation was formed purely by African American hands. But it is definitely something that they're trying to hide here. And that is how you correct history in real time with our ancestors' oral history. So we know, everyone who watches this video, we all know that Dunbar High School in Washington, D.C. is not the oldest in the nation. As of now, as far as the records we've seen, it's the Chestnut Street Academy, misnomered as the I.C. Norcom High. It ain't Israel Charles Norcom. He wasn't the first principal. Okay? The Chestnut Street Academy in Portsmouth, Virginia is the oldest in the nation, as far as we know right now. Okay? But let's go on. The ancestor says, after finishing Chestnut Street Academy, I went to Hampton Institute. In 1874, 6 years after Hampton Institute was started, I graduated. So what I want to do next, I want to look into the Hampton Institute, because again, this is her journey on becoming a teacher, but there is more historical relevancy to the Hampton Institute that I would like to highlight in talking about our ancestors' history on these shores. So what is the Hampton Institute that our ancestor went to? Okay. And look, real quick, we know the ancestor was accurate on the dates, because right here it says, in 1868 in Hampton, Virginia, Samuel Chapman Armstrong founded Hampton Normal and Agricultural Institute. So it was founded in 1868. 6 years after that date is 1874. And the ancestor said, in 1874, 6 years after Hampton Institute was started, I graduated. Excuse me. So we know the ancestor is giving us accurate dates. We can follow the dates. It's the ones that are quoting her that align. So it goes on to say that it was founded in 1868 in Hampton, Virginia. Samuel Chapman Armstrong founded Hampton Normal and Agricultural Institute as a non-denominational and co-educational school where young African Americans were to be trained as teachers. Armstrong, a white man, was convinced that most freedmen schools were failures because they did not address blacks' most pressing needs. He believed that the experience of slavery had caused African Americans to degenerate into a morally deficient caste, and he accepted the stereotypical image of the freedmen as poor, lazy, insolent, and lawless. To succeed, he argued educators had to respond to these harsh realities by developing an entirely new approach to education for blacks. In addition to offering academic instruction, schools had to contribute to their pupils' moral development and help them attain material prosperity. Armstrong intended Hampton to be a model school where generations of black teachers would be indoctrinated with his ideas. Because Armstrong believed that blacks would continue to serve as the South's laboring class in the foreseeable future, Hampton Institute became the first school for African Americans to adopt a comprehensive system of industrial education. All students were required to labor in the school's farms and trade shops for 2 full days each week. The stated goal of this manual education program was not to train skilled craftsmen, but to develop character and to foster a spirit of self-reliance among the students. Hampton's white teachers reported that the work system helped their pupils to appreciate the dignity of labor and to understand that prosperity could be gained only through hard work. In a nutshell, and real quick, the Chestnut Street Academy likely predated this as well. But in a nutshell, the founder of the Hampton Institute, he surmised that as opposed to let's say teaching the newly freed Negroes math, science, literature, English, social studies, things of that nature, it would be more important to teach them trade skills, how to physically work a job, how to build, how to farm, how to produce. Now, this caused a great debate, okay, amongst whites and amongst blacks. You had some individuals within the black community itself that said that this was merely an attempt to keep the Negro population subservient to the white population by keeping them as a labor force, as opposed to teaching them higher educational standards. Okay. And I sort of have mixed emotions about it, me personally. Like, I do believe that if our ancestors wanted to learn mathematics, science, history, social studies, things of that nature, those things should have been available to them. But I liken it to the discussion nowadays, where we talk about college versus trade school. Even now today, people are starting to understand that, okay, I can go to college for 4 years and I can get a degree and I might still not get a job. Is it not better to go to a trade school and learn a trade, learn how to weld, learn how to lay brick, learn how to fit pipe, learn how to be a plumber, learn how to work sheet metal, learn how to be an electrician? These debates are not new. These debates go back even to when our ancestors were immediately free from slavery, right? The whole higher education versus trade school. And even now, a lot of individuals are saying that sometimes college can be a waste of money. You can go to 4 years of college and not even be able to get a job after. Maybe it'd be better if you go and you actually learn a trade. And so, although he definitely, this Hampton gentleman, he definitely had racial overtones in how he spoke, and he pretty much probably had some racist overtones in his thought process. The general idea of what he's saying, I kind of agree with the trade over college. I think college and higher education is good for some, right? I do believe that some people, that they need to go and learn how to be, the doctors and lawyers, the business professionals. But I also understand that trade schools are important. The welders, the scaffold builders, the bricklayers, the pipe fitters, the plumbers, the sheet metal workers. These things are immensely important in being able to take care of oneself and uplift someone from a state of subservience, servitude, right? Like, look at it now. How many people do you know can build a house? Or not even build a house on their own, but know any of the processes to build a house? How many people you know can put up a fence in their backyard? How many people you know can actually plant a garden and grow something that they can actually eat? A lot of people talk about, how detrimental the food is in these grocery stores with the GMOs and things like that. But how many people actually know how to cultivate land? Yes, generally you put a seed in the ground and grow, but it's not that simple when you're trying to feed yourself. You have to know what type of soil is conducive to what type of seeds. You have to know what seasons to plant. When do you harvest, and when do you reap, and when do you plant, when do you sow? You have to know these things. You have to know how the weather will affect your crops. How many people know how to tend to crops? right? Individual that, you know, their toilet get clogged. They have to get on the phone and call the plumber. They don't know how to fix it. Something goes wrong with their sinks. They don't know how to fix it. It gets extremely cold. Pipes burst. They have to call someone to fix it. How good would it be if you knew how to fix it yourself? Right? So this is I, you know, I understand the relevancy and the importance of what the Hampton Institute was trying to do, irrespective of the racial overtones of the man who started it, right? Irrespective of that, okay. Also, they say that the influence of Armstrong's and in this Hampton Institute is where the ancestor actually went. This is why this is relevant to the slave narrative. But the influence of Armstrong's educational philosophy, known as the Hampton idea, soon spread throughout the South as Booker T. Washington and hundreds of other graduates applied the lessons they had learned at the Institute to their own schools. Substantial financial support from whites in the North enabled Hampton and its imitators to grow rapidly. Now, because I read a lot, when I was reading up on the Hampton Institute, you know, I immediately thought about Booker T. Washington, because that was Booker T. Washington's whole thing. He saw the benefit in teaching the Negro population trades, and everyone that went to the Tuskegee Institute that Booker T. Washington is famous for, everyone that went there did something to help maintain the school ground. They learned how to produce bricks and lay bricks. They learned how to make clothes. They learned how to cultivate fields. They basically learned trades. And Booker T. Washington got this idea from the Hampton Institute. He attended the Hampton Institute that the ancestor attended. He attended it as a child. And this is important because, again, Booker T. Washington is one of the names that we know when we talk about our impactful and our ancestors who made a positive impact on us today. But many of us don't know about ancestor Mary Jane Wilson, but she attended the same school and got a lot of the same teaching that Booker T. Washington got at Hampton. And in his success with the Tuskegee Institute and the carrying on of these ideas from the Hampton Institute was it was successful because he did get a lot of support from the white population. Now, if you recall, Booker T. Washington had a lot of the debates with W.E.B. Du Bois. Their ideas conflicted because W.E.B. Du Bois was one of the, if I can put it in these terms, in the college versus trade school debate, he was a proponent of college. Booker T. Washington was a proponent of trade schools. There was significant what's the word I want to use? There were significant benefits to both ideals and both standards. But me personally, I lean more towards the Hampton Institute. I lean more towards the Booker T. Washington. Although I consider myself more of an intellectual than a builder, I would have liked to have learned a trade growing up. I think it would be more beneficial in my life right now, today, right? And just to bag up what I was saying, look, as a young man, Booker T. Washington worked his way through Hampton Normal and Agricultural Institute. So the ancestor who ran the Tuskegee Institute, he learned at the Hampton Institute, just like the ancestor Mary Jane Wilson. Okay, check this out. When talking about the Tuskegee Institute, the school expressed Washington's dedication to the pursuit of self-reliance. In addition to training teachers, he also taught the practical skills needed for his students to succeed at farming and other trades typical of the rural South, where most of them came from. He wanted his students to see labor as practical, but also as beautiful and dignified. As part of their work-study programs, students constructed most of the new buildings, Many students earned all or part of their expenses through the construction, agricultural, and domestic work associated with the campus as they reared livestock and raised crops as well as producing other goods. So even some of our ancestors who couldn't monetarily pay for their education at the Tuskegee Institute, their work study programs helped get them the education that they needed. The work that they did paid for their schooling. And if you look at the bottom, it says Washington gradually attracted notable scholars to Tuskegee, including the botanist George Washington Carver, one of the university's most renowned professors. Now, we all have heard about George Washington Carver, the peanut man who found so many uses for the peanut. So high honors and salute to George Washington Carver and Booker T. Washington, who got a lot of their ideas from the Hampton Institute, where this other ancestor, may her name live on forever and may her memory never die, Miss Mary Jane Wilson, went as well. So she goes on to say in her slave narratives, at this point, Miss Wilson's pride was unconcealed. She continued her conversation, but her voice was much louder and her speech was much faster. She remarked, my desire was to teach. I opened a school in my home and I had lots of students. After 2 years, my class grew so fast and large that my father built a school for me in our backyard. I had as many as 75 pupils at one time. Many of them became teachers. I had my graduation exercises in the Emmanuel AME Church. Those were my happiest days. So just as the ancestor Booker T. Washington used what he learned at the Hampton Institute, this ancestor used what she learned at the Chester Street School Academy and the Hampton Institute to become a teacher herself. And she opened a school in her own home. And after 2 years, she had attracted so many new students. Her father, who made a nice living working at the Norfolk Navy Yard, that he was able to build a school for her in their backyard. And she had at one time as many as 75 pupils. And so not only was she a teacher, she not only was she one of the first Negro teachers in Portsmouth, Virginia, she was also one of the first to actually build a school and teach out of it. Okay, and so this ancestor story is incredible. It is incredible to me, and it has been unfortunately lost. And I just wanted to take some time to actually bring it back. So we give high honors and a great big salute to this ancestor for what she did. So this has been a video about Ancestor Mary Jane Wilson, from the Virginia Slave Narratives out of Portsmouth, Virginia. And again, I'm trying to make this channel one of the premier channels when discussing our ancestors' history on these shores and discussing our ancestors' history from their own perspective. So I hope you learned a lot more about our ancestors on these shores, some things that you may have already known, but I hope I share with you guys, as always, some things that you have never heard before. So Ancestor Mary Jane Wilson, may your name live on forever and may your memory never die. And we commend you for your life. We commend you for enduring what you did, and we commend you for taking the necessary steps to educate our people. When you're talking about education, it's like a domino effect. The same way that she was educated and she was able to teach and educate others, those that she was able to teach and educate went out into the communities, and they were able to teach and educate others and improve the lives of their family members and their children were able to improve the lives of their children because of the information that came from her. And no doubt some of our lives were directly impacted because of what she did, and for that we respect and honor her. So this has been one of the first Negro teachers in Portsmouth, Virginia, circa 1874. If you like information about our ancestors' history on these shores, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you like this video to get it up into the algorithm. If you know individuals that like to learn about our history, I implore you to share this video with them. If you have any more information on this topic that you would like to share, I encourage conversation in the chat. Leave a comment. I'll definitely read it. I'll definitely see it. So I appreciate it. Again, make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already subscribed, and make sure you hit the notification bell so you'll know when I go live, and you'll know whenever I upload a new video. And if you have time, scroll through my channel, because again, sometimes, and I do it too, but sometimes we spend so much time researching the history of others, and we spend so much time researching ancient history, Egypt, Greek, Rome, Mali, Ethiopia, Congo. We go thousands of years into the past, and we look to our greats, and we have some of our greats that were within 100, 200, 300 years that did amazing things for us. And whereas individual may want to argue with us about ancient Israelite history, Egyptian history, Ethiopian history, things of that nature, they may want to argue with us about that. There's no arguing our direct connection to these individuals that I'm choosing to highlight. So again, major salute. Thank you for watching. This has been your brother, Matthew Daniels. Hold on, let me put myself back on the screen so I can close out. Okay, just let me. There we go. There we go. Thank everybody for tapping in. This your brother Matthew Daniels, aka I'm Pooh, aka the Chosen Few, aka the Real Bookworm. But I'm not just a bookworm world. I am the real bookworm. Make sure you get it right. I'm doing the book game like it ain't never been done before, and I'm doing the book game like it'll probably never be done again. As always, may your name live on forever, and may your memory never die. Hotel, I'm out.